Hi everyone, my name is Mike Snow, and before I get started with this video, I want to make it absolutely clear that I love Twin Peaks. It is far and above my favorite television show ever. I've been loving it for about 15 years now, and that has not changed at all. And Twin Peaks: The Return is just more great gravy on top of that. I loved it, I loved every bit of it, and Twin Peaks: The Return easily, contemptuously sweeps aside the great majority of all television made in the past couple of years, maybe in the past 10 years or so. It just knocks it aside. It is so far and above better than that that it laughs at it. It is so much better. However, it is most definitely not perfect in any way, shape, or form. It is something that can be criticized, as anything can, and it did some things wrong. And that's what I'm going to get into here. So remember, I'm going to link my other video, 10 Things I Loved About Twin Peaks: The Return, in the description at the end of this video, so you can take a look at that, maybe before you watch this, just to get a read that I absolutely love it, and I think it's an incredible show before you watch this. So remember, I'm saying this with love, for a show that I loved, for a renewed season of the show that I loved, that it was absolutely amazing, but these are the things that drove me to despair. Starting in no particular order, let's start with the general design of the series. Now, this is designed to be, as Lynch himself has called it, an 18-hour movie. This is an awful idea. Human beings cannot withstand watching more than 6 or 7 hours, usually, I think, of media, before their brains begin to melt out of their ears. And I know marathoning things is really popular these days, and I can be guilty of that too. But I just think in general that after 2 or 3 hours of something, you really have to take a break, pull back, and let yourself digest it. And David Lynch and Mark Frost seem to design this to be viewed all in one go. Like every little bit, all of the story threads and plots and ideas are parceled out in tiny little bites, and it feels incredibly contrived and artificial, like they deliberately went and took something that was a normal, regular meal and cut up all the little pieces of food into tiny bites and spread them around on a canapé platter, and we can take little bites here and there on a bunch of different things all the time. And I really don't think that this worked at all. It was ridiculous to see one story with one character that, if you added all of the scenes together, would be 20 to 30 minutes long, and see it spread out across like 12 episodes or something like that. It was ridiculous. What was the point of that? I mean, I know somebody's going to say in the comments, oh, well, this was the point and that's what it is, but I don't care what they were intending to do. I think they failed miserably at that. I don't like this idea. I've watched Berlin Alexanderplatz, another one of these great epic marathon, like 20-part movies or whatever it is, and it really just doesn't work. It's too much across 18 hours. 18 hours of entertainment that ludicrously jumped around, just ridiculously between things and ideas and places and people. Far too much for my taste. I think they just should have, there was no reason not to group certain things, certain events, and certain characters into one episode. Just spend 15 to 20 minutes of them looking at Richard or looking at Shelley, but instead we get like 5 minutes with them, and then 2 episodes passed, and then we go back to them for another 8 minutes, and then 3 episodes. It was ludicrous. Everything that was done with Audrey really served to draw out everything that was happening over weeks and increase the mystery. But that really should have been just one episode where we look at Audrey and see what's going on there. But the fact that he stretched everything out and extended it brings me to another point about the structure, which is that they did not have 18 hours of material to work with. It is absolutely ridiculous to think that they did. In fact, when Sunset Boulevard popped up in one of the episodes, one of Lynch's favorite movies, I'm told, I instantly thought of one scene.
Norma, you're a woman of 50. Now grow up. There's nothing tragic about being 50. Not unless you try to be 25.
There's no shame in making a 9 or 10-hour television series unless you try to make it an 18-hour television series. The whole thing felt like a fucking ridiculous 1970s prog rock album that was spread over 3 vinyl records, and like half of the music was a drum solo that went off for 18 minutes on one side. And it's like, what the hell are you doing? Cut this crap out. You don't need it. Blue Velvet was originally 4 freaking hours long, and it did not need to be. It is a masterpiece of perfection of 2 hours. It does not need a single second more on that entire thing. And I'm sorry here, but this is not very popular with the auteur theory set, but sometimes a director definitely needs to have limits imposed on them, and they need to be forced to do something along a certain structure. Because if they don't have that structure, what are you going to do? They're a bunch of wild chaos just stretching out forever. It just gets ludicrous. Now, I can understand that all of this is kind of stymieing and frustrating and rough on directors and creators, and there are a lot of horror stories of people, including David Lynch on Dune, being forced to do things he didn't want. But I'm sorry, I can't side with the director on everything. The director and the creator is sometimes wrong, and a more sober-headed producer should have come in and said, no, David, you don't have this much story. Admit it to yourself, you do not. You have 8 or 9, maybe at the max 10 hours, and huge amounts of the rest needed to be cut out. I kind of felt this way about some things in the second season of Twin Peaks, so this isn't a new experience for me, but it just seems ludicrous that the entire project could have been compromised by David Lynch walking away from it, when really he didn't have 18 hours of story, and he was ridiculously, almost petulantly attacking Showtime for that. He didn't have it. He didn't frickin' have that much story here. End of discussion. Next up, it would have to be the music and the sound design on the show. Now, I loved the original music for Twin Peaks and for Fire Walk With Me. It's some of the best TV or movie music I've ever heard in my life, and listened to it regularly. And I like David Lynch's albums. And David Lynch was the one that actually did the sound design for this, but I think it just sounded kind of awful. You could barely hear any of the music in the background half the time during the show. I could only faintly make out traces of it here and there. It was so much in the background. It was so submerged. It just seemed ridiculous. It seemed like it wasn't even, there was no point to it being there. In the original and a lot of other David Lynch's work, the music can be big and powerful and overwhelming, and it really drove your understanding of the emotions that the characters were supposed to feel during the scene. And that was really, really interesting, and I really, really liked that. Now, if you didn't like that style, fine, but I don't know how you could like the original show without that. And this new style, I mean, it's almost designed for, like, hyper-audiophiles who have just, the best hearing in the world and the most elaborate setups for their sound around their television, that they could hear every tiny little nuance on everything. I mean, I was watching it with the subtitles on sometimes, and I could barely, it would say, like, it would show a noise or say a sound on the subtitles, and I'm like, is that there? I barely hear it. It's so faint. It's like they're whispering too much, and I can't really hear anything. And also, I really didn't like how the way the lodge creatures spoke. Because in the original one, there was a distinctness to it and a creepiness and an alien nature to the sound when they reversed everything that people were saying. And you actually needed subtitles to understand what was going on, or you wouldn't be able to realize what they were saying.
That the Mule is going to come back in style.
But in the new one, the lodge creatures are speaking almost normally. It sounds so faint. It's like the new hyper-modern digital effect is too good. It's too perfect at recording their voices, and you don't have that weird reverb effect around everything what the creatures were saying in the original one.
Is it future or is it past? Someone is here.
It doesn't sound alien enough or unique enough. And finally, the end music. See the first part of this list about not having 18 episodes worth of material. It is ridiculous that they closed every episode with like a 5 to 10 minute musical number. And if you loved every single one of the songs they used, then it would have been great. Although even then, it's a little bit questionable whether they should have done that to sort of like establish the mood for what was going on in that episode. But it's not like the overture of an opera that starts at the beginning of everything and gives you a feeling of the mood and the sentiment of the story. It came at the end of everything to sort of wrap it up. It didn't make sense. Or was it the music not tied into anything at all? Or was it tied into things from other episodes? Like one episode could be about something that happened in another song and another episode's ending. I mean, I don't know what was going on there, and most of the time I didn't care for the music. It wasn't awful, but it was okay. It was innocuous. I wasn't really interested in it. The opening one with the chromatics with Shadow was fantastic. The one with Nine Inch Nails, which was in the middle of an episode, which was interesting, and that really worked. I liked that. Julie Cruz played once, who of course I love. But really, Eddie Vedder's song was pretty good, but that's like 4 out of 18 episodes. It was usually not very good at all. I just wasn't interested in it. Uncomfortable encumbrance on every episode. They were stretching everything out so much. Like, how do we get 18 hours? Like, I don't know. We'll close every episode. We don't know how to finish. Let's just do a musical number at the end, and we'll say it's like artistic or something. Look, I really just didn't like that, and all of these things, or virtually all of them, should have been cut. It was unnecessary, it dragged every episode down, and I really just didn't like it. I mean, maybe if I liked the music I would enjoy it, but it just didn't work for me. Next up, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I know it angers people, but Dougie Jones. Dougie Coop. Some people get angry if you call him Dougie Coop, but I don't really want to call him Coop because, Coop, after he's had a stroke and severe brain damage, doesn't seem like Coop to me, He seems something different. The Dougie sequences were a perfect example. Again, see section 1 on this video if you want to know why. They did not have 18 hours worth of story. This was a ridiculous encumbrance on the show. It was not related to the main story. It typically was not very interesting, and I could not stand it after a while. Now, I didn't hate everything about it. I liked those Joker cops who were yucking around. I liked Ike the Spike. I liked Janie E. because Naomi Watts is a really good actress, and she was kind of a firecracker character. But Dale here was like a block of wood. I mean, I've heard people praise his performance, but I thought it was ridiculous. It was awful there. And, obviously he did such a great job as Evil Coop and regular Coop. He's clearly a fantastic actor. I really think he's one of my favorite actors. I really, really like him. And the fact that he was essentially playing a piece of furniture in most of these scenes is not very fun, it's not very interesting, and it got old a long time ago. Like, even after the first episode, I think that everything after that could have been cut out. Now, there are some people that have come up with elaborate theories about Dougie and feel that he's a major part of the show, or they really liked him as a fun, interesting character, or we needed him as something to juxtapose against the darkness and the other sequences. But I just did not like him at all. He bored me. The whole thing about him involved with the gangsters was ridiculous because obviously the gangsters were not going to kill him. I didn't think that was going to happen. It typically was not very funny. I mean, occasionally I would get a yuck here and there, but virtually not at all. And, the best line was by the Mitchum brothers at the end where the Polish guy starts shooting up the car and one of them says that, people are under a lot of stress these days. That was funny. But we're talking about probably grouped together hours and hours and hours of stuff with frickin' Dougie, and I just could not stand it. So I'm not going to go any more of that because I know it angers people. But yeah, this was an irrelevant part of the show that could have been excised easily. Did not like him. Next is sort of an odd one because it ties into something that I thought was part of the best aspect of the show, which is the lodge space, the white lodge, the black lodge, the weird purple ocean thing, all of that. All of that I thought was great, and there were great aspects to it. However, for the most part, I really didn't like how they sort of made the lodge in that world mundane and made it interact with the regular world too much. Like Carl Rod could see the stupid little CGI fire up above him, or Dougie Coop could just look down and see like the lodge underneath him for some reason, and in the cutting through the frame. They made the lodge and the creatures in it a little bit too explicable and a little bit too normal. The whole tulpa thing, the fact that they brought in this, I don't want to say real world because it's not real, obviously. Tulpas aren't real, but this sort of real world mythology from Tibetan Buddhism about tulpas and supposedly how they can exist in the Twin Peaks world just made it a little bit too comprehensible. There's not enough of the Lovecraftian fear of the unknown. And the lodge was always scary because you didn't really know what was going on in there. What was could you trust any of the creatures in there? Even the giant or the fireman. Can we really trust him? Because he didn't explicitly tell us things. Why didn't he just explain what really happened to us? Why did he make us go through this whole nightmare that resulted in another girl's death after Laura was killed to find out who killed her? Why didn't he just tell us what was going on? Why did he make us find out? The man from another place was never clearly good or evil. We don't know if the Leland that we see in the lodge at the end, he looks like a doppelganger Leland, but then we see another Leland in the lodge in this one. Is he good or evil? They made it a little bit too clear and a little bit too certain what was going on in the lodges for my taste. And when they did show the lodges, especially outside of the lodge, they used computerized effects, which I hate. I'm a big fan of practical effects, and CGI should only be used under extreme circumstances. Just look at, Fire Walk with Me, where there was very little computerized effects. There was more practical effects and editing that they used to show the weirdness of the world, like when David Bowie shows up and Cooper is there and he sees himself still in the frame of the camera even though he's left, and they're cutting away to electrical wires and there are weird noises and things like that. It's all very much in the background, and we don't really, it's sort of creepy and unpleasant and unexplained, and there's a musical roaring when David Bowie sort of disappears. He like literally teleports, like with a transporter, into a hotel in South America. And thank God that was cut out, because it looked ridiculous. And people are teleporting to weird, like, vortices in the sky in this one. And, like one of the weird little fireman guys who were genuinely creepy and very scary, and were walking up to Matthew Lillard's character to just crush his head. It just sort of appeared in reality a little too easily. There wasn't the air of the bizarre or the mysterious around them. They seemed to be integrated into this world a little bit too much. Now, the last episodes, episodes 17 and 18, did a great job of being mysterious, maybe arguably a little bit too mysterious, but the rest of the series, the Lodge stuff, was not very well done with the CGI bullcrap, and just a little bit too mundane and boring and integrated into reality, and without that sense of mystery and wonder that we came to expect from the series before that. Finally, I mean, it's got to be the fact that they didn't use the original characters enough. They had a ton of the original characters, many had tragically died, but a bunch of the original actors to come back on the show and reprise their roles. All of them seemed to be enthusiastic and happy about it and wanted to do it and were interested in the characters and that wanted to tell these stories. And David and Mark just didn't use them. They barely used them, I should say. I mean, we saw Bobby Briggs a decent bit. We saw a little bit of Shelley, a little bit of Norma, but large amounts of them were just gone or just not really part of the story very much. They were here, for a few minutes, and then 2 episodes later we'd see them for 5 minutes, and then a couple episodes later 8 minutes, and it just, we didn't get the characters that we came to know and love. And I'm not saying that they can't introduce new characters, but they didn't use the original characters to any measurable effect. They had James Hurley. His character was virtually not at all on the show. I mean, it was there barely at all, just a teensy-weensy little bit for, it was probably, if you added them all up, this weird little split segments of an episode or two, they would just be cameo roles for like a couple of minutes in one episode of 18 hours. And that is ridiculous. It's inexcusable. Out of all the other things I've said, remember, I think that you could say that, okay, you could easily have another opinion on all the other 4 things I mentioned, and there are probably people who have radically different opinions about what I've said, but this one I think is inexcusable. This one is uncontroversial about something wrong that they did. They had the characters, they had the actors, they should have worked it out of their schedules if it was a scheduling issue, but I take it wasn't, because they would have to write out huge numbers of characters if it was, and they should have just put them in the bloody show, their own show. Why did they not have these characters in there? It's crazy. I hated that aspect of it. I hated that we didn't get to see the original characters in it, and it's just enraging that they didn't use them more. Especially when they were there and ready and still acting, and, we just didn't get a chance at that. It's really unfortunate. I'm not saying I didn't like what we did see of them, of course I did, but there should have been more of it. Tons and tons and tons more of those characters, with Shelley and Bobby and Big Ed and Norma and Andy and Lucy and James. They all should have been in there, and the fact that they weren't is really upsetting. The 5 things that I hated about Twin Peaks The Return, I have to reiterate in case people have forgotten, I loved Twin Peaks The Return. It just wasn't perfect and could be criticized, and there were major things to criticize within it. It's still far and above an amazing show, one of the only things worth watching on TV in the past couple of years. It is absolutely amazing, and I want there to be a season 4, maybe a finale movie of some kind to bring everything back together.
Doubtful, Andy.
So please, like this video if you liked it. Dislike the video if you hated my opinions on that. But please leave a comment, too, explaining why you hated the things that I hated or why you didn't hate the things that I hated, why you loved the things that I hated. Explain in the comments for me why you felt that way about this series. And also I want to reiterate, it is still absolutely brilliant and worth watching, and everyone who is interested in David Lynch or really just good TV in general should watch Twin Peaks: The Return, because it's absolutely amazing. It is just engorged beyond its ability to contain itself into a comfortable sized structure. And I'm going to be linking a couple of my videos here, including the top 5 things I loved about Twin Peaks: The Return, so if you haven't watched that video, please go and watch it. And I'm going to be linking some other Twin Peaks videos up here too. I'm going to be working on more Twin Peaks videos, including character breakdowns for Bobby Briggs and for Shelley Johnson, and probably also eventually for Albert and for Gordon Cole. And yeah, that's it. Thank you very much and have a good night.